significant amount of time will be required, and I'm sharing the screen now so that we will cover the first. Sorry, not this. We'll so welcome to the class, and we'll like to cover the first uh, segment of Paradise Lost, the first 90 odd lines, as it were. Now, we will begin, of course, with the verse that Milton talks about, and Milton is writing it in blank verse. So, English heroic verse without rhyme, as that of Homer in Greek and Virgil in Latin. So, obviously, Milton is staking a claim to the classical epic, and he's following in the footsteps, only changing the subject. Rhyme being no necessary adjunct to true ornament of poem or good verse in longer works especially, but the invention of a barbarous age to set off wretched matter and lame meter. So, in that sense, he's suggesting that to approximate the epic style or the epic language, he requires the imitation of the classical rhyme or the classical measure. So the blank verse is in direct conjunction with the sense of the epic subject matter of the text. So this is one of the points that I would like to suggest. Aditi, I'm sort of allowing you to be the co-host, right? So maybe you could actually sort of let people in as they join, right? So that I can concentrate on my teaching. Is that okay with you, Aditi? Right, thank you. So Milton is sort of right at the onset alerting us that he will be following the classical epic tradition. And therefore, he suggests that he is not going to follow some famous modern poets carried away by custom. So he suggests not without cause, therefore, some both Italian and Spanish poets of prime note have rejected rhyme, both in longer and shorter works. So he's falling back upon the renowned poets and suggesting that to suit his subject matter, the blank verse is going to be the good oratory that you can see on the screen. Right. Now, he then goes on to talk about the subject matter, as it were, the argument of book one. So the first book proposes, he says, the first in brief, the whole subject, man's disobedience and the loss thereupon of paradise wherein he was placed. So the hero of Paradise Lost squarely is man, and to be more exact, Adam. And therefore, it is a story of disobedience and the fall. Then touches the prime cause of his fall, the serpent. So once again, another very important figure, and we were referring to Aditi's question yesterday. You see, God exists on the tangent of Paradise Lost. It is rather, and only comes in at the fag end of the text. On the other hand, you see, Satan, as it were, with his machinations, covers a lot of ground in Paradise Lost. So he immediately introduces Satan, who, revolting from God and drawing to his side many legends of angels, was by the command of God driven out of heaven with all its crew into the great deep. Now, the specializing this great deep, the darkness visible, as it were, Milton will say, is one of the great poetic achievements of Milton. Uh, think about this of the blind Newton. I'm sorry, I'm getting crazy. The blind Milton, thinking in terms of spatializing this concept of hell, of the the place where Satan is being completely thrust. So it's an interesting way in which he's conceiving, uh, even through his blindness, a kind of zone where darkness becomes visible, as it were. It's this visibility of the darkness within the imagination that I see is part of the great appeal of Paradise Lost, so that every single moment in Paradise Lost, despite its epic grandeur, is, as it were, vivified within our minds. Right. So, which action passed over the poem hastes into the midst of things. This is the medias res, presenting Satan with his angels now fallen into hell, described here, not in the center. For heaven and earth may be supposed as yet not made, certainly not accursed, but in a place of utter darkness, fitliest called chaos. So, from chaos to cosmos, you see, this entire concept of chaos is associated with the question of confusion, confundus, as it were, and therefore of moral uncertainty. Whereas heaven, as it were, is a space which is marked by a certainty, a loyalty towards God. But once again, let me just highlight the fact that in Milton's universe, as I pointed out in my earlier session, that in Milton's universe, you see, there is a degree of ambivalence, so that the traditional Christian idea is perennially held in a kind of a tension with the idea of rebellion, with the idea of free will. So here you will find that while Milton, in the earlier segments, is talking about the fall of Satan, the castigation of Satan, the evil quality of Satan, there is also, in a different way, a certain questioning of authority and you know allegiance towards the monarch that we saw. Yes, Satan with his angels lying on the burning lake, thunderstruck and astonished. Again, the sense of confusion is something that Milton will talk about. Also astonished, as in completely vanquished. After a certain space recovers as from confusion, calls him up, who next in order and dignity lay by him. This will be Beelzebub, the other angel, the archangel. They rise their numbers, array of battle, the chief leaders named according to the idols, known afterwards in Canaan, this is Palestine, and the countries adjoining the Holy Land. To these Satan directs his speech, comforts them with hope, yet of regaining heaven. So you see, very interestingly, Milton is at the very beginning of the text positing Satan as the protagonist of book one. In book one is all about Satan. So, and then he turns out to be this consummate leader and orator who comforts them with hope, yet of regaining heaven, but tells them lastly of a new world and a new kind of creature to be created, for that angels were long before this visible creation was the opinion of many ancient fathers. He's talking about man and his desire to corrupt man. To find out the truth of this prophecy and what to determine thereon, he refers to a full council. What his associates thence attempt. Pandemonium, the palace of Satan rises, suddenly built out of the deep. The infernal peers there sit in council. Once again, one of the things I would alert you to is, while there is a very significant moral quality in Paradise Lost, can you see that Paradise Lost is also a poem about power, about politics, about counsel, about loyalty, about leadership. So, in a certain sense, you will find this overlap between the religious and the political forever within the text of the poem. Let us now go on to what is the first part of the epic, and this is the traditional, what we will call the invocation to the epic. Now, uh, of man's first disobedience, and this is where you can sense the ponderous quality, the epic style of Paradise Lost, imitating the classical uh, Latin invocation, as it were, of man's first disobedience, and the fruit of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe. So, once again, the subject matter of Paradise Lost is the fall of man. With loss of Eden, till one greater man, this greater man, of course, is Christ, who is seen as the greater Adam, as it were, greater than Adam, in the way that he's going to rescue, he's going to regain paradise for man, restore us and regain the blissful seat. Sing, heavenly muse. Now, if you look at those first lines, you see they state the argument or the subject matter of the epic. So, the function of the invocation is manifold. The first function of any epic invocation is to state the subject matter of the text, of arms and the man I sing, Virgin, even Homer. So Milton states, following this tradition, he states the subject matter of the poem and replaces the classical, as I said, the context of battle with a different battle altogether, the battle for the human soul, and therefore the biblical motive. And that is how the Christian epic is forever, in a dialectical relationship with the classical epic. Now, the second thing that Milton is doing is that sing, heavenly muse. Which muse is Milton going to talk about? So he has to change the muse, as it were. So these are not the 9 Apollonian pagan muses, but it is rather the wisdom and the power of the Judeo-Christian divinity. And in using this kind of metaphor, he is sort of falling back upon the archetypal figure of Moses. Moses, who was seen to be that great shepherd, who was seen to be the person to whom God delivered his message. So, in that sense, the heavenly muse is the muse of Judeo-Christian divinity and also refers to Moses. Sing, heavenly muse, that on the secret top of Oreb or of Sinai, the Mount Oreb and Mount Sinai, where Moses received this word of God, as it were. So that shepherd who first taught the chosen seed is the Christians, as it were, the Jews. In the beginning, how the heavens and the earth rose out of chaos. So Milton is referring back to this concept of Genesis, and it becomes also poignant because chaos is going to be the state in which Satan will find himself in. Right. So on the secret top of Oreb or of Sinai, did inspire that shepherd who first taught the chosen seed in the beginning, how the heavens and earth rose out of chaos. Or if Zion Hill delight thee more, and Siloa's brook that flowed past the oracle of God. So he's sort of transposing these biblical locations on, as it were, Mount Delphi, right? So that the spring by Mount Delphi becomes Siloa's brook, and Mount Delphi itself becomes Zion Hill. So, in a certain sense, Milton is deliberately evocating the the parallels to the classical landscape of the muses. So every step, as I pointed out, the Christian epic is falling back upon, or Milton, in using the Christian motive, is falling back upon classical parallels. Right. So fast by the oracle of God, I thence invoke thy aid to my adventurous song. This is also again a classical part of the invocation, that the muse is addressed and the aid of the muse is invoked for the poet's song. And the adventurous song, interestingly, this adventurous song, the word adventurous here could mean, a, a song that moves across many events, as it were, a dramatic song in that sense of the term, that with no middle flight, and he intends this song to be almost ethereal in its quality, middle flight intends to soar above the Aeonian mount while it pursues things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme. So this is again the traditional classical, sort of uh, metaphor, where motif of the invocation, where the song, the superiority of the song is announced as something which is unparalleled and unique. So, it pursues things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme. Now, so far, Milton has done two things, two very important things. One is he has stated the subject matter, or rather, he's done three things. He stated the subject matter of the text. He has invoked the muse, replacing the classical muse with the Christian word of God, the figure of Godhead, as it were, who spoke to Moses. And he's also sort of announced very triumphantly the superiority of his song over all other songs, the superiority of his poem. Now, at the moment when the text turns to the poet, so my song is best, then Milton realizes that he is, in a sense, falling prey to the same sense of pride that Satan was falling prey to. So quickly there is a movement towards, the divine, from the self to the divine, as it were. So, and chiefly thou, O Spirit, that dost prefer before all temples the upright heart and pure, instruct me, for thou knowest. Now, this may or may not be the heavenly muse, but the difference, if any, is very slight. So it is basically the heavenly muse to whom he is turning. And he's suggesting the creative power and the wisdom needed for such an undertaking, because Milton's scope of the epic, if you come to the last line of that invocation, let me read this through and then I'll come back. So, instruct me, for thou knowest, thou from the first wast present, and with mighty wings outspread, dove-like sat brooding on the vast abyss, and made it pregnant. What in me is dark, illumine? What is low, raise and support? That to the height of this great argument, I may assert eternal providence and justify the ways of God in man. So, the project, you see, this is the vast declamation, that his ultimate project is to justify the ways of God to men, right? So the justification of the ways of God to men requires enormous insight, and therefore Milton is invoking the Godhead. Milton is invoking the muse to bless him with this knowledge, to infuse him, to inspire him with this knowledge, because as a human subject, he is unable to perceive the depth and the breadth of this vision. Therefore, Milton is emphasizing the creative power and the wisdom needed for such great undertakings, or creating the world and writing this definitive poem, as he calls. Therefore, uh, Milton is therefore evoking this classical concept of inspiration. But this inspiration, in the sense, is also qualified as a kind of an illumination, right? Now, you will, of course, remember that, when uh, when Plato talks about inspiration, he talks about a certain kind of a possession. But in this case, Milton would rather use the metaphor of light, of illumination, of knowledge. And therefore, he uses the metaphor of the dove. Now, in the Gospels, the Holy Spirit is said to have assumed the shape of a dove when it descended to earth. So he's invoking the biblical concept of the Holy Spirit, and it hovered or brooded, as it were. So Milton is using this image of the Genesis, where the dove, as it were, the Holy Spirit, as it were, broods over the chaos, and hence makes it pregnant, and therefore draws out from chaos the earth. Right, so from darkness to light. And therefore, Milton is also praying to this Holy Spirit that he be brought from darkness to light. Right, so it's interesting in the sense that, also remember that, when Milton uses this image of making pregnant, within the figure of this Holy Spirit, Milton is adding both masculine and feminine qualities. Right. So Milton's project is therefore epic, to justify the ways of God to man. For that, he seeks the power of the muse and the power of the Holy Spirit, and therefore explains that his subject matter is about the fall of man, and he seeks the blessing of the muse for the great song that he's going to create, which is unparalleled yet in verse or rhyme. So the invocation makes 4 important points, and the invocation as an unit can be discussed as well. What are the 4 points? True to the classical epic, Milton lays down the subject matter, the disobedience of man and the fall of man. Secondly, he invokes the muse, but replaces the classical muse with the Christian muse, and therefore the classical topography with the Christian topography. Third, true to the classical poet, he announces the superiority and uniqueness of his text, which is unparalleled. At the same time, at this moment, Milton would feel that he is prioritizing the poetic self rather than the divine Holy Spirit, and therefore quickly retraces his step and suggests that the Holy Spirit should illumine him, because the Holy Spirit is the foundation, is the source of all knowledge. Thou knowest, I don't. Now, very interestingly, this metaphor of blindness and light is being played out. It is the poet who is blind, poet who is man who is blind. It is the divine spirit who knows and therefore has light. Yet, armed by the light of the divine spirit, the blind poet is going to illumine the ways of God to men. So interesting play with light and darkness, knowledge and chaos, and the self and divinity. Milton's self is always, the poetic self is always within this, as it were, tug and war with divinity, where he cannot allow his own pride, like Satan's pride, to triumph over the ultimate Christian purpose of the poem. So the classical and the Christian elements within Milton are held in a state of taut tension, whereas also the self and the divine is also coming into a state of play. So it is in this complexity that we will take a look at the rest of the text. That, therefore, is a very important part of the poem, the invocation. Say first, and he's addressing the spirit once again, for heaven hides nothing from thy view. So you can see everything. You see, the metaphor of seeing for the blind Milton is a very important metaphor at this point of time. Illumination, knowledge, spiritual awareness, and the fate of man. So God is beyond space, beyond time. Thou canst see into the life of things, nor the deep tract of hell. Say first what cause moved our grandparents, that is Adam and Eve, in that happy state. So Milton is asking this question, it's provoking this question once again in the tradition of the classical epic, because the classical epic also move. One of the rhetorical strategies of the classical epic would be to ask questions about motivation. So he's asking this question, what motivated our grandparents in that happy state from favored of heaven so highly to fall off from their creator and transgress his will for one restraint Lord of the world besides? Who first seduced them to that foul revolt? Right, so he's asking who provoked them to revolt. The infernal serpent. And now Milton comes to Satan. So you see, it's been just 32 odd lines when Milton has talked about man. He's talked also about divinity, about the divine power. And then immediately he comes to the question of Satan. And you see, it's almost as if the poem is in a hurry to come to Satan. And he talks about this rebellion and Satan's state right now. So the infernal serpent, it was he whose guile, you see, this word which we will be using throughout Paradise Lost is Satan's guile, Satan's way with words, Satan's power to convince, Satan's power to argue. Now, it is here you see that language, words become very ambiguous. You see, what is important to understand is that the serpent has a forked tongue, in the sense that he can play around with words, as it were. So the slipperiness of language and the use of language to convince is a power that Milton is also suggesting. Satan is full of guile because he has the power of language to seduce. And finally, therefore, he will be turned into a serpent and he will be thrown, he will be shorn of this power of language altogether. So one of the things which we shall also take up somewhere down the line is this power of language, as it were. So, one of the things that you probably saw in your study of Macbeth, if you have already studied Macbeth, is the power of language to equivocate, rather than the power of language to know, as it were. Anyways, so the infernal serpent, it was whose guile, stirred up with envy and revenge, deceived the mother of mankind. This is Eve. So Satan is stirred up with envy and revenge, two very important motives. His pride hath cast him out from heaven with all his host of rebel angels. Host in the sense of army, as you can see on your screen. So the rebel angels, as I said, 1/3 of the angels actually sort of sided with the devil's party, as it were, of rebel angels, by whose aid aspiring to set himself in glory above his peers, he trusted to have equaled the Most High if he opposed. So Satan wanted to be as powerful as God. So his rebellion was, as it were, marked by a search for power, with the ambitious aim against the throne and monarchy of God, raised impious war in heaven, and battle proud, with vain attempt, him the almighty power. So, once again, it is, as it were, Satan's voice is seen as a kind of a challenge to the monarchy of the rule of God, as it were. And once again, immediately you can see how the political idea of kingship, rebellion, that becomes important as a motive in Satan, and how he will have to very carefully tread across the ambivalences of this statement. Right. So, raised impious war in heaven and battle proud with vain attempt. Him the almighty power. And this is where, he'll be talking about the Satan's casting off from hell. So, him the almighty power hurled headlong, flaming. And remember that Satan was, of course, Lucifer, the star, as it were, the angel of light. So, hurled headlong, flaming from the ethereal sky with hideous ruin and combustion down to bottomless perdition. So, you see, once again, you have this very careful mapping out of the different spheres from heaven, as it were, to the bottomless, hideous ruin and combustion down to bottomless perdition. They're to dwell in adamantine. Adamantine, in the sense, is extremely strong, which cannot be broken. Adamantine chains and penal fire, who durst defy the omnipotent to arms, 9 times the space that measures day and night. You see, once again, very interesting is how, Milton is spacing out the difference between heaven and hell in terms of actual distances. To mortal men, he with his horrid crew lay vanquished, rolling in the fiery gulf. So at this point of time, Milton's Satan is prostrate. He's sort of confounded. He's defeated. He stands vanquished with his entire horrid crew, with his army. Lay vanquished, rolling in the fiery gulf, confounded though immortal. But his doom reserved him to more wrath, for now the thought boast of lost happiness and lasting pain. You see, on the gates of hell, of course, in Dante, you have written, despair all ye who enter here. Therefore, it is eternal despair, reminding us once again of Prometheus's, eternal pain, as it were. So, lost happiness, Milton's Satan's pain, as it were, is dual in the sense of the lost happiness and eternal pain. Torments him, round he throws his baleful, malignant eyes, once again in that sense, that serpent-like eyes that witnessed huge affliction and dismay, mixed with obdurate pride and steadfast hate. Now, despite this, Milton's Satan is heroically going to announce that he will never do good and that his hatred is eternal. Right. So, at once, as far as angels ken, range of sight, he views the dismal situation. So he's taking a look at his empire of hell, dismal situation, waste and wild, a dungeon horrible, on all sides round, as one great furnace flamed, yet from those flames no light, but darkness visible. You see, very interestingly, this entire, of course, that I just would like to point out the darkness visible is onomatopoeia by, darkness, the phrase that Milton uses, once again, is taken from the concept of the biblical space, as it were. He's talking about utter darkness. He's talking about utter darkness, and he is referring to the biblical book of Job. In the biblical book of Job, Milton, I'm sorry, it is written, "Let me alone, that I may take comfort a little, before I go, whence I shall not return, even to the land of darkness and the shadow of death, a land of darkness, as darkness itself, and of the shadows of death, without any order, and where the light is as darkness." So, this concept of a darkness that is more powerful than light, right? And this, as it were, the simultaneous coexistence of opposed concepts of light and darkness creates a deeper sense of the internal darkness within Satan, as it were. So, Satan is, as it were, therefore confronted with a sense of waste and hatred and despair. So, Milton is falling back upon the concept of the biblical hell, as also he is using this concept of the classical Dantesque notion of the inferno. So he's drawing upon both these words. So, so a dungeon horrible on all sides round, as one great furnace flamed, yet from those flames no light, but darkness visible, served only to discover sights of woe. And he looks at his compatriots also prostrate on the ground, regions of sorrow, doleful shades, where peace and rest can never dwell, hope never comes. These lines, of course, echo, the lines of Dante, of course, that, despair all ye who enter here. And of course, Euripides again, to me, even hope that remains to all mortals never comes. So, but torture without end. And you see, it's almost reminding you once again of Prometheus, because Prometheus is going to be a figure whom Milton will evoke in the text. Still urges, and a fiery deluge, fed with ever-burning sulphur unconsumed. Such place eternal justice had prepared for those rebellious, here the prison ordained in utter darkness, and their portion set, as far removed from God and light of heaven, as from the center thrice to the utmost pole. So once again, you see how Milton is trying to measure out these distances. From the center of the earth to the last point of the atmosphere. So thrice that distance is the distance between heaven and hell. So heaven and hell are created, as it were, as binaries: loyalty versus rebellion, hope versus despair, happiness versus eternal despair, light versus darkness visible. Right? So it is in this sense that you see Milton is trying to create these as kind of binaries. Oh, how unlike the place, and this is, as it were, compared with heaven now, how unlike the place from whence they fell. There the companions of his fall, overwhelmed with floods and whirlwinds of tempestuous fire, he soon discerns, and weltering by his side, rolling in the waves, one next himself in power and next in crime, known long after in Palestine, and named Beelzebub. Now, this is his primary deputy, his first, his first assistant, as it were. Now, Beelzebub is called the prince of the devils in Matthew, in the book of Matthew. And the name may have a synonym for Satan. So very often, Beelzebub is also referred to as Satan himself. Its meaning is Beelzebub means the Lord of the Flies, suggesting a mythical origin in the worship of a god who delivered men from insects, or of one who himself was infested by flies. Milton's portrayal of him seems rather to be based on the allegorization invented by Saint Jerome, in which a fly is a symbol of pertinacity. Beelzebub never ceases to infest the human race in every way. Beelzebub, in other mythological studies, is also seen as the lord of darkness and the lord of greed. So, Milton's great deputy, first deputy, is Beelzebub. So, long after known as Palestine and named Beelzebub, to whom the arch enemy, and thence in heaven called Satan, with bold words breaking the horrid silence thus begun. So we will stop here at this point of time. So what we have studied so far is this entire segment where Milton is laying down the invocation, talking about the quality of his poem, the intention of his poem, invoking the spirit, asking for illumination. He's already talked about metaphors of light and darkness. And he is now going to, he's talked about the state of despair, the physical concept of hell as both a state of mind as well as a physical space. And he is now on the verge of initiating us to the powerful rhetoric of Satan as the leader of the rebel angels. So I'll stop sharing at this point of time. We shall take up Satan's speech in our next class, which should be tomorrow. And once I've finished recording, we'll discuss the time when we can hold the next class. Right. In the meanwhile, if you have other questions, we can answer them. Just a minute, let me stop the recording.